Again, good morning. Thank you for joining us, both of you online, 1.5 person always, and those of you who are here. By the end of the day, there's like 5 views, but I think it's just that one person watching it over and over again. Maybe they take a bathroom break and log back in, and it counts as a new viewer. So thank you, whoever you are. Probably like Salazar's mom. Could be. Anyways, we're back at Ezra chapter 3. Today we will finish said chapter from verse 7 to verse 13. Just to remind you, last week we read about the account of the start of the building project. We know that initially they started to work on the altar. So that was the first thing that they did, even before the actual temple structure. And now we get the portion where we start seeing some of the things that are being built on the actual structure, namely the foundation. So that's more or less what we will cover. But before we get started, let me go ahead and tell you a little story. I usually do, catch you up on my life, my exciting life adventures. And as you know, I'm relatively handy, not because I'm talented or anything, but mostly because I'm cheap and very proud. And you put those two things together, you get handiness. I try to be as thrifty as possible. Obviously, if you hire someone to do stuff, you have to pay. And as I mentioned, I'm kind of proud, so I usually figure if somebody can do it, I can do it. Obviously, I wouldn't try heart transplants, but for things that are a little easier, I always figure I can do it. And, to a degree, I've been relatively successful, especially when we're talking about, fixing stuff up in home, or in this situation specifically, in the little black car that we have, otherwise known as Bella's car. The horn went out, so it's likely an electrical problem. And I haven't fixed the problem. I've been at it for a couple of weeks. I haven't fixed it, but I learned something, which is what I want to share. So I've done some electrical work, mostly at home, and most of you are familiar. I'm not an expert, but just the basics I know how to do pretty well. Usually when you have, something electrical in nature in your home, you have a positive wire, that's where, the power comes in. You have the negative wire, that's, to complete the circle, and you have a ground, that's for safety purposes. So usually 3 round wires, sometimes more, and then it gets really complicated, but that's kind of the basics, and, they have different colors, so you know exactly, where you're sticking what to where. Okay? And I was working at the car, and the problem is likely electrical in nature. There's a list of things that are possibly going wrong, which is why the horn is not working. It's not functional. And part of the potential problem is a bad ground. And usually a ground is just for safety purposes, but in a car, and this is what I learned, there isn't a positive, a negative, and a ground. There technically is, but actually it's the positive, red, and the negative and ground are the same thing. They have different functions, but they go to the same spot. So whatever you have in a car that is electrical usually needs to be grounded, but technically that ground goes indirectly to the negative terminal of your battery. So again, everything that functions in your car that you turn on that is electrical in nature directly or indirectly connects to the negative terminal of your battery. Positive as well, but here we're talking about just a potential problem with grounding. Why is this useful? Well, if you're having an issue, electrical in nature, what you can do to test whether or not there's a bad ground, usually you have a little wire and it's attached to a bolt in some metal part of your car. What you can do is you can attach a cable of sorts directly to your negative terminal and then to that device. And if it works, you know that it's a ground problem, and then you have to figure out why. But again, everything directly or indirectly connects to the negative terminal of your battery. I know some of you are just very passionate about this story, but I will circle back and it will make sense. Just keep that in the back of your head. Let's do this. From verse 7 to verse 13. They also gave money to the masons and the carpenters, and food, drink, and oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre to bring cedar logs from Lebanon to the Sea of Joppa, according to the permission which they had from Cyrus, king of Persia. Now, in the 2nd month of the 2nd year of their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem, Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, Jeshua the son of Jozadak, and the rest of the brethren, the priests and the Levites, and all those who had come out of the captivity to Jerusalem, began work and appointed the Levites from 20 years old and above to oversee the work of the house of the Lord. Then Jeshua with his sons and brothers, Kadmiel with his sons, and the sons of Judah arose as one to oversee those working on the house of God, the sons of Henadad with their sons and the brethren, the Levites. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests stood in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, and with cymbals to praise the Lord according to the ordinance of David, king of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to God. For he is good, for his mercy endures forever towards Israel. Then all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was raised. Verse 12. But many of the priests, Levites, and heads of the fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of this temple was laid before their eyes. Yet many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard afar off. So here we have, again, the start of the building project pertaining to the actual temple. Specifically speaking, now they're just laying the groundwork, the foundation, so that the structure can eventually arise from there. We have somewhat of a timeline mentioned here. So basically, from the end of chapter 2 to now chapter 3, 1 year has passed, more or less, a little bit more than a year. So they arrived, they sort of got situated, they started, organizing themselves, and now they're actually doing things. We know that the first building project was the altar, and now 7 months later, more or less, we have them building this foundation or this particular base. On verse 7, we see some details that seem rather unimportant, but actually there is a reason and a strategy here. When Ezra, likely, or whoever else was compiling, this information, mentions certain things here, The purpose is for this building project to be very similar, attached to the building project of the original temple, the one that Solomon built. That is described more or less in 1 Kings chapter 5, chapter 6. That's where the inauguration occurred of that particular temple, the first temple. So here we have the second temple, and we are given a lot of detail. And again, these details, they don't seem very important, but they were extremely important to make this connection between this temple and the old temple. Ezra, Zerubbabel, the leaders, the community at large, they did not want people to think that this was a brand new, different, better, or whatever temple. They wanted this to be as like the other one, the previous one, as possible. So when we have information, it is an information that is connecting to the previous structure. So when it says here, starting on verse 7, they also gave money to the masons and the carpenters, and food, drink, and oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre to bring cedar logs from Lebanon to the sea to Joppa, according to the permission which they had from Cyrus, king of Persia. Here, certain people are being mentioned, and certain materials are being mentioned, and these are the exact people and material that the original building or temple was built from or with the help of. So again, he is going out of his way to make these connections. There's this, that saying that imitation is the highest form of flattery, correct? Well-known saying. And again, on that note, he is trying his best to document how this was a perfect imitation of the previous temple, to the point where they were using the exact types, similar types of wood, or the exact same types of wood, and again, be assisted by the same types of people. Moving on, verse 8, now in the second month of the second year of their coming to the house of God at Jerusalem, Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Jeshua the son of Jozadak and the rest of the brethren, the priests and the Levites, and all those who had come out of captivity to Jerusalem, began work and appointed Levites from 20 years old and above to oversee the work of the house of the Lord. So, additional information that does not seem very important, but in light of what I just said, it was extremely important. First of all, we have a date here. It says the second month of the second year. But this is not February. This is April-ish, May, April, somewhere in between. As I mentioned before, the Hebrew religious calendar is slightly different than our calendar. But this was the time period of the year that the previous temple was also beginning its building stages. So everything is sort of being lined up. We also have a reference of who was working, who was leading, and who was doing what, including the Levites. The Levites specifically from 20 years old and above. It's interesting if you look at the law. Initially, the Mosaic law, when these roles were being established, they dictated that the Levites, specifically the priests, but those who were doing similar types of jobs, they needed to be 30 or older. Later on, when David reorganized the Levites, and he did so by organizing them in different family groups so that they could rotate in and out in their service to the community at large, but also the temple. But actually, David lowered that age to 25 and then 20. So again, here we have a connection. a connection to David, who was the one that originally brainstormed this idea of having a temple built to God for the praise of God, and then that endeavor was passed along to his son, but he was the one who was, more or less orchestrating this endeavor prior to actually it being, built and, come to fruition. And now they are circling back to those standards that David himself was the originator of. Also, there is a practical purpose here, purpose for lowering this age as well. I mentioned before, when we had that list of people, about 5,000 people that were of different categories, if you will, when we got to the point where we had a list of the non-priest Levites, I mentioned that there were very few of them. There were a lot of priests, but the non-priestly Levites, there were very few. So again, for practical purposes, it makes sense for you to lower that age so that you have more of them being available to do this type of work. And then we have verse 9, which basically are these families that were in charge of oversight and general leadership. It says here, then Joshua with his sons and brothers, this is not the same Joshua that was the high priest, this is a different one. Kadmiel with his sons and the sons of Judah arose as one to oversee those working on the house of God, the sons of Henadad with their sons and their brethren, the Levites. So again, 4 major groupings of people with their families, and they were the ones in charge to lead and oversee, which helps us to understand how organized this endeavor was, and in general, the necessity for oversight and leadership. I know that we all like to be very independent, to be masters of our own will and universe and endeavors, but there are not many things in life where more than one person is required for a task or something to function that you do not need leadership. Actually, when a group, however small or big, is void of leadership, is void of people that can provide oversight, that's when chaos occurs. Directly or indirectly, all of us need to be led. Sometimes we are called to be those leaders. Oftentimes we are called to be led by them, but this should be something that we welcome, because void of leadership, everything just kind of comes apart very quickly, very easily. I had this friend of mine at seminary school. He was actually a professor, missionary. That was his background. So he worked a lot with native populations. And he had this saying, it's also an American saying, but obviously he said it in Portuguese. Whenever he saw a group of people not really functioning very well, he would utter these words. He said, "Man, you see that group? That tribe has way too many chiefs and too few Indians. That is the reason why they are not functioning. That is the reason why they are not able to focus. That is the reason why they are not working efficiently. That is the reason why there is chaos. That is the reason why that is not working. Way too many chiefs and not enough Indians." Moving on. So now we have sort of the structure of what is happening, when it was happening, what they were actually doing, who was more or less in charge. And from verse 10 to verse 11, there is a pause. There is a pause for celebration. And it says here, when the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests stood in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, to praise the Lord according to the ordinance of David, King David of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercies endures forever towards Israel. So after laying the foundation, before moving on with building the walls and the other portions of that structure, they paused and they celebrated. So it's interesting that there was still a lot of work to do. But as I mentioned, chronologically, if you read through, it almost seems like they just arrived, they built the altar, now they're building the foundation, and they're moving right along, right? In a couple months, everything is going to be done. But actually, it had already been over a year of work. Not only doing the things that are described here, but also many other things that the author didn't mention because, there was no need to mention. But for sure, they had to carry a lot of material. There was mention of the wood, the logs, the trunks that were being brought up, imported from other places. The ship would dock somewhere, and they would literally have to carry that for miles and miles and miles until they got here. Also, just clearing out all the junk. Again, it was just, piles of rock. Rock upon rock upon rock, but not only that, a lot of things were burnt, overgrown, decayed, so they needed to clean all that up. It took a lot of time. So once they got into this portion of the building project, they stopped. They stopped to do something extremely important, to praise. And there's mention here even of, again, a connection to David. Once more, Ezra's intent was to give us insight so we know that they're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. They are connecting this building project, they are legitimizing it by mentioning things that were the same in the previous building, in the previous temple. So he mentions these directions that they followed in accordance to the directives of David. Specifically speaking, David, as I mentioned, he organized the Levites, and part of their duties was, they were to be musicians. Asaph, the family of Asaph, mentioned here as well. They were very renowned for that. We have even psalms that are attributed to him and the family. David also, again, organized them in families and in groups so that they could rotate in and out. So now they are relying upon those directions that David originated to incorporate in this new system. But actually, it was the old system that they were renewing. And there's a mention here of what they sang. We see that is described as them singing responsively. The term responsively here is where we derive, responsive readings, such as the one that we've been doing and did today during worship. You see that very clearly as being a norm. Because even certain psalms were poetries, they were meant to be read, but many of them were meant to be sung as well. It was basically music. And many of them have this format where it is almost an answer to a question, and the term responsive, literally in the original, it means to answer. So think about two groupings of people here. One sings a portion of the song, and then the other responds with another portion. And they sing at each other, almost like a singing battle of sorts. One sings one portion, and then the other sings the other. One asks the question, and then the other responds. One makes an affirmation, and the other one continues by making another affirmation. Back and forth, back and forth continuously. If you want to take a look at a psalm that exemplifies this perfectly, in your own time, I'm not going to read it because it's a rather lengthy one. It's Psalm 136. These words are repeated over and over and over again, 25 verses or whatever, and in almost every single verse, after there is mention of something that usually God does or is or did, there's mention of this phrase where God is said to be good and his mercies endure forever. So again, they stopped everything. And even the mention here of the high priest, this was very significant because, or the priest, because he was finally able to wear the garment that they had not worn for over 70 years. They had been waiting for this for a very long time. We don't know if it was exactly the same one that they took to Babylon and now came back, or if they made new ones, or if they somehow fixed the old ones. But fact of the matter is, they had not worn it for over 70 years because they did not have the temple. They didn't have reasons, nor were they allowed to, because the garments were meant for a particular temple-centered purpose. But now finally, no wonder they stopped. They had been waiting for this for a very long time, and the first opportunity that they had to worship, they did. And what did they worship? How did they worship? What words did they use? For he is good, and his mercies endures forever towards Israel. No sweeter words, especially based on context. We are talking about a people that had suffered for over a lifetime, yet they are able to reflect upon their lives. Most of them, it was their entire life. For some, it was the great majority of their life. But basically, that's all they knew. All they knew was captivity. All they knew was suffering. All they knew was a relative amount of pain and sadness. Think about this for a second. It had been 70 years at best. You had certain people, and we will see this, that experienced a little bit of the old days, but the great majority of their lives were lived in exile. And the majority of the other people, that's all they knew. Yet they are able to sing this. Yet they are able to utter these words, regardless of the experiences that we've had. We know that the Lord is good, and his mercies last forever. No sweeter words. Moving on. As they were singing, as they were celebrating, it says here, and I'll just jump to verse 12 and finish off at verse 13. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of the fathers' houses, old men, grumpy old men, who had seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of this temple was laid before their eyes. Yet many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard afar off. This is actually going to connect with stuff that is going to come on chapter 4. But here the idea is, some of these older men, people, who were probably in their 80s and even some in their 90s, had experienced the previous glory days. They saw the temple of Solomon in all of its glory. They witnessed it. But then they also saw the calamities. They saw the destruction. They saw it literally being burnt to a crisp. And now they are gazing upon this sight, and they're reflecting upon those happy memories, very likely, and the tragedy that occurred right after. And now it's moving forward, but still nothing comparable. And they are weeping, and they are saddened, and they are grieving. But ironically, you have this other group comprised of those young people that don't know any better because they've never experienced it. All they knew was exile. All they knew was the Babylonian experience. All they knew was what they had in this foreign land, and now everything is new. And now things seem to be progressing wonderfully. They are almost naive to those tragic experiences, and to them, oh, what a joyful, what a happy occasion. Look, we've built the altar, we've cleaned things up, we've built the foundation, we're moving, that's great. And they're singing for joy, and they're happy, and they're shouting. While this other group of people, they're crying, wailing. And they're at it. Similar to how they were singing in the responsive reading, now they are showing their emotions in a very verbal way, in a very loud manner, and it's almost like it's being blended in to the point where you can't really, you know how sometimes when little kids do that, you don't know if they're laughing or crying? Imagine adults doing this. From afar, you couldn't tell if they were happy or sad, because again, these sounds that they uttered, they blended in to a thing that could not be distinguished. And do you know what's most interesting about this passage? It's that we don't have any indication that one was right and the other was wrong. We don't. Yet we have two very distinct expressions. Don't you agree? And you almost want to know who was right and who was wrong. What was pleasing to God? Because it seems like a dichotomy. Yet we don't. Which leads us to believe that all was right. When life happens, you and I, all of us, as humans, we express our emotions. And that's essentially a part of what makes us human. Meaning, God created us in this fashion. And when life happens, different people deal with different things in different ways. And it's okay. Some people laugh and smile and are joyful, and that's okay. Some people cry. They are saddened, depressed, and that's okay. Some people fear. They get nervous. Lots of anxiety. And that's okay. Some people feel disappointed, almost numb. There's so much going on that they can't even express anything. And that's okay as well. It's interesting that the Bible, it limits our actions. The Bible tells us, do this, don't do that. The Bible never limits our emotions. But what it does, it tells us, be emotional. You cannot read through the Psalms without understanding that. The Bible allows us to be emotional. Whatever emotion you want to have. But there's one caveat. Circling back to my story. Regardless of what component in that little black car, I've looked through them all. Still haven't fixed the problem. I've looked at the battery, the alternator, and everything in between. All have different functions. All have different reasons of being in a particular place in the engine compartment. They look different. And that's okay. As long as they all connect and are grounded on that little terminal, the negative terminal of the battery. Emotions are okay. As long as in the end, it grounds us. It connects us to the realization that God is good and his mercies last forever. Amen.